welcome Eric to the Creative Writing Wizard podcast. Great to finally meet
Thanks
you.
for having me. It's good to meet you too.
Yeah, I think we connected about a year ago. But for those listening in, can you tell a little bit about yourself, what you're working on at the moment, and why you're excited about it?
Okay, well, I am a sci-fi and horror writer of short stories, novels, and screenplays. I've currently got a few projects on the go. I've got an anthology, a story appearing in an anthology that's coming out. Don't have an exact date yet, but sometime in the middle of this year. I've got a space western novel called Giant Gambit that's coming out in September. I'm working on a web series adaptation of a public domain horror story. If you're in Canada and and you have Bell, it's going to be on TV1, so you'll be able to watch it there. I'm also working on a horror feature film that I've done a couple of drafts for that, and we're hoping to maybe start shooting that late in the year and fall maybe. And I've just gotten started on outlining a new science fiction novel. So, and then on top of all of that, my magazine, Perseid Prophecies, which is kind of an ongoing quarterly speculative fiction magazine that Glenn has appeared in.
Indeed, indeed. Yeah, I was actually going to talk to you a bit about that. I think that's a little bit different than the previous two authors that we've had, because you've got such a range of experience. So not just you're not only a writer, but you're also an editor. You're also a screenwriter in combination with the science fiction that you've been writing. How did you get into that? Like, what led you to say, I'm going to start a magazine because this is the cool thing to do?
When I was, I still am submitting short stories to magazines, but when I first started doing that, it seemed like there was, magazines get so many stories and they have to reject so many stories because they can only put so many in each magazine. It just seemed like there was still a market for more, and I've always loved short stories. I was an avid reader of anthologies and magazines when I was a kid. And I also, kind of wanted to showcase some of the classic public domain horror and sci-fi and like weird fiction stories that are out there that they're not quite as mainstream as they used to be. So I decided, why not start a magazine? Then I can lift up other authors that were in the same position as me, as well as kind of introduce younger, newer readers to some of the older stuff that's out there that acts as the foundation for a lot of what you see in TV and reading books now.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool. In the first one you did, I believe they're all public domain stories, and then even now, as you continue to release them, you're incorporating that public domain. That's such a cool spin on it because, I feel like there's a lot of stories that are in the past that are now public domain that we kind of miss out on because people may not even know that they exist. So that's pretty cool. How have you have you been finding that going for you? So this is now I want to say fourth edition.
Fourth issue just came out on January 1st. It's quarterly. I love it. I mean, it takes up a lot of my time because it's me. I am the entire staff. I have to read all of the stories. I have to pick the ones I like. I have to edit them. I have to format. It's all me. So it takes a while, but I love every minute of it. Like I said, big fan of short stories, so now I'm privileged to read short stories that, even the ones that I don't ultimately pick for each issue, I'm still reading some fantastic stuff. It's always a tough choice every quarter, and I feel privileged to have the opportunity to read some of this stuff that hopefully one day will see the light of day and others will get to read it, but for the time being, I'm part of a select few people who actually get to see it before it's published, and it's a great honor. I love it.
Yeah, and one of the things that you mentioned in your blog is that you are currently working as a marketer, although in one of your blog posts, I think you called it a reformed marketer as your day job, and then you're looking to transition into writing. First off, what is a reformed marketer, and how did you get into writing?
A reformed marketer, I mean, who likes ads? Nobody likes ads. So I'm trying to work my way out of that. A lot of what I write in my daytime job is blogs for companies. I had a corporate job for a while doing that, and that was a little soul sucking. And yeah, it's frustrating having to write in someone else's voice for a particular audience that they want. And while it was my job and is my job, I want to write in my voice. I want to write what I want to write about. So that's the move towards writing. And how I got there, it's kind of a funny story. I never really considered myself much of a writer. Through middle school, high school, I didn't do too much of that. And ironically, I did write some fan fiction in middle school, but still never considered myself a writer. And then it was in university. I majored in psychology, which is a lot of essay writing, and that's kind of where I started to shine. A lot of my classes I only passed because of my writing ability, my essay writing ability. And I still didn't make the connection to writing fiction, despite being an avid reader. It never even occurred to me to do it. But I had this story for a kind of World War II superhero in my head for years. It's been 10 or 15 years at this point. And I always kind of envisioned it as a comic book and thought that it would be a great idea for a graphic novel or something. And then my wife, after hearing me talk about it for the millionth time, was like, why don't you just write it as a novel? And that was like a light bulb moment for me. And the funny thing is, I haven't written it yet. It's not even what I'm working on now. Hopefully that'll be the next project. But yeah, it's just kind of ballooned from there. And now I am fully trying to make it my career, whether it be screenwriting or novel writing. I mean, honestly, the ideal would be write a movie or two a year to pay the bills and then spend the rest of my time writing novels.
Yeah, that'd be pretty sick. And you've mentioned in your one of your latest blog posts that you actually are working with a handful of people outside of outside of doing the magazine, outside of publishing your own story, outside of your blog writing, that you're working with a horror film director. I know you mentioned you can't talk too much about it, but yeah, is there anything that you can talk a little bit about, how you got into that and how that experience has been?
Sure. That's actually kind of strange too. It's not your mainstream path to filmmaking, that's for sure. My wife works in film and television. She has for 15 years, longer than we've even known each other. She specifically is in costuming. She does wardrobe. So she encouraged me to at least try out screenwriting. So kind of on a whim, I decided to write my own kind of homage to The Thing, one of my all-time favorite horror movies. So I broke down the John Carpenter movie scene by scene, figured out where all the plot points were, figured out where all the themes were, at least that I could understand, and tried to emulate it. And that is something I can talk about. That is a screenplay called Uncanny Valley. And I submitted it to Coverfly, I think, was doing a screenplay contest. I submitted to that, made it through several rounds, got some great feedback from their judges, and ultimately made it to the semifinals, I think. I think it was in the top 5% of all entrants, which, not a win, but for the first time ever trying to write a screenplay, I think that's pretty good. And then that... my wife was talking about it at work, and one of her coworkers, after a couple of weeks, had heard that there was a project being shot called Uncanny Valley, and she told my wife to congratulate me for my movie getting made. And we were both like, that's not my movie. So the coworker asked for a copy of the screenplay just to make sure that there wasn't any funny business going on, so she could look into it and make sure that my screenplay hadn't been swiped or something and they were doing it without my permission. And that turned out not to be the case. Everything was legit. But that coworker is also a producer. She's got a production company called Dead Mariachi Films. And she, in the course of reading the screenplay to make sure that it hadn't been stolen, loved what she read. And they optioned it from me. They took I had built out a whole pitch deck and everything, and they took it out to the Cannes Film Festival in France last year to look for funding. That's still an ongoing process. We haven't gotten anywhere quite near making that, but that parlayed into getting a contract with the same company. Her partners, Brian Quintero, is another producer with Dead Mariachi Films, and he wanted me to write his idea for a horror movie. Like you said, I can't talk too much about it. I am under contract, but I can say that it's an eco horror, so ecological. It's basically man versus nature, but with like a slasher film bent to it, and that's how I got there. So from writing an homage to The Thing now to being under contract to write a horror movie. It was a wild ride, and it's still going, but here I am.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's crazy how some of these seemingly unconnected pieces just kind of like line up in such an odd way that eventually leads to something. So yeah, definitely. I'm curious to see how it goes. I mentioned to Sean in the last podcast. I'm a bit of a horror wuss, so I might not watch it, but I'll cheer from the sideline and be like, "Yeah, you did it!" Or maybe I'll watch and I'll just cover my eyes or something. I don't know. But yeah, I guess that's another question. So you mentioned that you work in sci-fi, fantasy, and also horror. How do you go about picking the genre? Like, do you choose it in advance, or do you feel like the stories just kind of come out of you and they just happen to be within one of those categories?
That's a good question. I think it depends on the story. There are times when I set out to write, a particular genre. Like, for example, my novel, Giant Gambit, I knew exactly what I wanted to do from the beginning. I knew I wanted it to be sci-fi Western with a heavy emphasis on the Western. Now, at the same time, I knew what kind of themes I wanted to talk about, and I knew that those themes fit well with those genres, so it kind of worked out. Of course, there are other times when you just sit down and start writing, and the next thing you know, you've got a monster terrorizing a small town. So, it's a bit of mix, a bit of both, I guess.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because, yeah, I've definitely found that with my own writing where, I'll either start with like a nugget of an idea, and I'll continue to grow it into something else, or correction into something. But then there's other times where I start on a certain path, and I'm like, oh yeah, I know where this is going. But as I continue to write it, it just becomes like this completely other thing. Yeah, so I can definitely appreciate that. Um, and talking about my own writing a little bit, one of the things that you mentioned already is, had the piece that you published in your magazine. How did you find, working as an editor versus writing? Because I feel like it's a similar mindset, but also you're looking from a different perspective. So like when you're looking through the works that have been submitted to, I'm going to say this wrong again, Perseid. No, Perseid.
Perseid, yeah.
There we go. Perseid. New words. It's actually not a fantasy word. I was like, oh, you made up a word to put in your thing, but it's like, no, it's actually a cosmological word, which is pretty neat. But yeah, back to the question: how do you find working as an editor versus writing?
It's different. It's difficult. I know that every writer feels some imposter syndrome. I feel no stronger imposter syndrome than I do when I'm editing somebody else's work. It's a bit of a challenge to get over that because often I'm like, well, who am I? Who am I to tell them that they should be doing this instead of that? But you're right; it's a different perspective. I mean, it's I'm trying to work on behalf of the people that are going to be reading it. I'm trying to make sure that I'm putting together the best content that I can for the magazine, so that the magazine will get more readers and will continue on to success. It's a different mindset, and it can be hard to go from one to the other. I still struggle with it. It's only been 4 issues so far. I'm hoping that the longer this goes on, the easier it'll get. I suspect that is not the case, but I'm going to keep at it because as hard as it is, I do like it. So just muddle through until we get there.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that because I was going to say one of the things I really appreciated is after I submitted it, you gave some really good feedback as far as like a pattern that I didn't notice. I'm not going to call it out in case people read my work and they start to see the pattern. Um, but yeah, I thought it was really helpful because as I write stuff, I don't necessarily see it because I've written it. I read it. It's kind of coming out of me in that way. But yeah, after you pointed it out, it's like, man, that's super helpful.
I'm glad to hear that.
So I, yeah. So yeah, as much as I do understand the imposter syndrome side of things, I also recognize that you understand what you're doing, and it also shows up in your own work. So like I read the SSID that you had published with Alex Parker Publishing. And I thought to myself on reading it, I'm like, dang, this is good.
Thank you.
And subsequent to that, I want to read your novel. Although if it's horror, I'll read it with half eyes closed. I guess the one question that I did have though is there going to be a part two? Because I feel like it was like, oh, this is getting good, and then oh no.
Oh, actually, I don't think so. I like the way that it ended. I like the way that keeps you wondering what's going to happen to this person and what other curses are going on at the school too.
Yeah, that's totally fair. It was nice to have a short, contained story, where yeah, it's like you led into the character, you introduced this element of a question, and then you're ending with that kind of lingering question. Yeah, I mean, as a as a person who just watched a show that had a cliffhanger, there's a part of me that's like, oh snap, this is a cliffhanger. But then, like you say, there's times where it's like sometimes leaving you with that lingering question can actually be as powerful as if you had actually resolved the question, or if you present a solution to that.
Sometimes what happens in the audience's own mind is better than anything the writer can come up with. So it's good to leave it on that note sometimes.
Indeed, indeed. Yeah. Yeah, and you've also had several shorts that you did on your blog as well. One of the most or more I guess it's last year. One of the recent-ish ones was the Today's Undead Forecast, which I really like the spin that you took on it. I didn't pick it up when I read the title, the forecast aspect of it, but as soon as I started reading it, I was like, oh, this is such a great spin. What kind of gave you that idea of like the undead forecasting?
Actually, it was the first episode of The Last of Us, which started with that kind of. I don't know if you've seen the show, but the first episode starts with that kind of like it's like a talk show setting, but I think it's the late '60s or something. And I'm just like, well, that's interesting. What if I do an allegory for climate change, but with zombies, and it's just all dialogue? It's all this kind of people talking about what's going on in the background, and no one really takes it seriously. That seems like an interesting idea, because that's literally what's happening right now with climate change. So that's no, that's basically what it was. What if climate change was zombies instead? And and that opening scene for Last of Us I found really intriguing from a storytelling point of view. So I just ran with it.
Yeah, and I also like that. The I don't know if it's tongue in cheek as much as just like swapping out the climate change versus zombies, but that kind of the cyclical it's man made versus not man made issue. Recognizing I don't necessarily want to go into too much of the politics side, I did appreciate like that kind of spin on what if it was the same scenario but a different element that's being debated, and how silly it sounds with that in the perspective. There's also another part. I don't know if it was meant to be a joke or not, but there's a subtle joke about I think it was closer to the end where he said, people won't require documents to enter into Canada, but if you need to go back, then you have to have proof of citizenship. Like Canada's like, yeah, sure, come on, you're escaping. That's that's understandable, but no, if you're coming back, you gotta have that proof of citizenship. It's like, oh man, was that a intentional joke or
it's actually based on what happened in 9/11 when all the planes landed in Canada, and they made the play Fly Away Home, I think is what the play is called, about it. Yeah, a bunch of American flights landed in Canada. Canada just with open arms just took those people in because of what was happening, and with all the planes being grounded and everything. So it's kind of a nod to that, and then the political atmosphere right now in the United States as far as people coming in. So yeah, kind of a tongue in cheek joke. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I liked what you wrote recently in your blog about how um, you know, our writing is I'm going to paraphrase here, so feel free to correct me. Um, it's hard to not be political with your writing because like we're writing from our perspectives, we're writing from our experience, we're writing about what we believe in. So inherently, there's going to be an edge to it that touches on the political, even though maybe we're not writing specifically for a political situation. And I also appreciated that why you were saying that was on the basis of, people should be respected regardless of what community they, are a part of. Specifically in this case, LGBTQ plus. I like that you talked about that. That's an important part of your stories. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, to me, the best stories are trying to convince the reader of something. It can be little things. It can be, what the best kind of orange is, or it can be, great big political concepts. I mean, as a science fiction fan, I tend to lean more towards the, great big questions of the universe. But it's always it always comes down to the writer trying to convince the reader of something, and that is inherently political. It's even if it's something little, it's still, like you said, your experience. You're writing from your heart. So I think it's important to use that platform. Like science fiction in particular has been political commentary for as long as there has been science fiction, and horror as well. Especially zombies. Zombies has long been political commentary. You go back to the first, like, well, maybe not the first, but like the George Romero stuff, Dawn of the Dead, Night of the Living Dead. There's a lot of political stuff in there, especially that first black and white one. One of the main characters is an African American man, and unlike the tropes that would come later, he survives, and that's done intentionally. So, then you get all your Star Wars, a small, plucky rebel alliance against the big evil empire, and your Star Trek, where post scarcity and everybody has the same inalienable rights, and it's all inherently political, even if it's just the minutia of politics and how people should live, and how the writers think that people should live or be allowed to live. And I have a lot of friends and family that are not white Anglo-Saxon cis straight, and they, in my opinion, have every right to live the way that they see fit, as long as they're not hurting anybody as everybody else does. And the fact that that is in dispute in some corners of our society makes me feel like I need to kind of stand up and give my opinion any way that I can, and I do that through stories. So
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think a lot of the things that I'm working on right now is kind of based around that vibe, and I think you and I are on the same page of, it's getting to a point where it's not enough to just keep existing in peace with everyone and just living your life. That there's an added layer of, we want to do something about it. We want to help people. We want to make sure that voices are being heard, which by having the magazine, that is a form of it. By writing your stories, that's another form of it. I guess the question I have for you would be, how do you walk that line? Because as much as there is the aspect that you're trying to get across, maybe it'll upset certain people, maybe it won't. How do you walk that line of you're writing something that's for public consumption, you want people to read it. You don't want to tick off everybody on the planet, but you also don't want to lose that, the heart of the why behind the story.
You know, I'm not sure. I'm learning how to do that every day, and it's not always easy. Like the blog post that you're talking about in particular, I went back and forth a number of times over whether or not I should talk about that. I was worried that if I got too political in my public facing media, that I would lose potential readers, I would lose followers, and since I am trying to make this a career, I would lose potential revenue streams. And then I just decided that if you actually are going to be a reader and you read my stuff, my politics is right there. Like the novel that's coming out, Giant Gambit, the main character is an LGBTQ plus woman. I have all kinds of non-binary characters and non-white characters, and like the bad guy is a rich white male. So like my politics are all laid out there on the page. So I just sort of decided that people are going to see what I think. People are going to see who I am. If they read my stuff, I may as well just be genuine about it. And I think that that's really all that I can do. If you don't like my politics and you're not going to read my stuff, you weren't going to read my stuff in the first place. So, I try not to be too gratuitous about it in public and even in my writing. I prefer things that are a little more subtle. But I that's what I like as a reader too. I mean, if you're beating me over the head with your politics in the book, then I start questioning why you didn't just write an essay instead of writing a story. So it is a fine line, and like I said, I'm doing my best to walk it every day, but I try not to worry so much about it anymore. As long as I'm telling a good story or editing a good story for the magazine, that's really what I try to keep at the forefront. I want to talk about these themes. I want to get these themes out there, but they all have to serve the story, and the story comes first. And if I keep that in mind, then the politics isn't going to be, everything. I'm not going to be punching you in the face with it too much. But hopefully you'll get what I'm trying to say, and it'll make you at least think about it.
Yeah, no, I dig that. And I feel like you did that well in the today's Undead Forecast
Thank
short,
you.
where it was like I enjoyed the story. I picked up on what you're hinting at, but it wasn't so much in your face that you're like, like obtuse about it or too upfront about it. But it was still there because it was an important part of the story. So yeah, I think you did well with it.
Thank
So
you.
I'm curious to read more of your writing because I haven't read that much, and you have several things in the works. You also mentioned in your blog about a horror web series. What's that? How do you say that differentiates from your feature film? Or like, because I don't know if I had that much experience with like a web series concept.
Well, it was different in that the horror is 90 pages. It's in a screenplay. It's about a page a minute, so it's about a 90-minute thing once it's filmed and edited. But the web series, it's broken up into 15-minute episodes. So it's like telling 6 short stories that all make one long story, because you have to have a beginning, middle, and end for each episode, but then they have to flow from one to the next. And my co-writer, that's the other thing. When I joined the project, the first 3 episodes were already written, so I had to kind of match the tone and match the voice a little bit, while also putting my own spin on the subject matter. So it's he also, the co-writer also wants to, he's also the director, he wants to film the 6 episodes for TV1, and then he also wants to edit it as a 90-minute feature. So it's this juggling between making sure that every episode is its own kind of self-contained thing, but at the same time it all works together and flows together as the larger story. And it was a challenge. And writing short 15-page screenplays is a challenge for me, because as a writer, as a prose writer, when I'm writing short stories and novels, one of the things that I struggle with is descriptions. I get overly flowery, and they just take up pages and pages and pages. And a lot of that's what gets cut out when I go back to editing. And you can't do that in a screenplay. There's just no room for it. The way that a screenplay is formatted, the dialogue is just right in the middle of the page. It only takes up like the center, like quarter of the page, maybe third of the page. So two characters having a heated discussion can take up 3-4 pages by itself. There's no room for anything else. So it's a challenge, and then that from a feature, there's even less room in the web series because you got to get to the point. And I couldn't even do 15 pages. My director wanted them to be like 12 or 13 pages. We'd have a few extra minutes, so we could have longer scenes here. We could, take in this landscape there, look at this cityscape over here, and so it's so limited. You really have to learn to just get exactly what is needed on the page and leave everything else out. It's an experience, that's for sure. Going from writing a novel to writing these itty bitty little screenplays, it's a challenge, but it's fun.
Do you find that you have like preferences between the two, or do you enjoy kind of working in both?
Yeah, at first I definitely preferred writing in prose. The novel was my favorite experience so far, but the more I write in screenplay format, the more I enjoy it. And it really was the format that kind of stuck in my craw for the first little while. Like I said, you don't get any room for descriptions. Everything is in present tense, which is difficult going, like, I just wrote 115,000 words in past tense. Now I got to switch to present tense for everything. The formatting really got me for a while, but now that I'm getting more and more experience with it, I'm kind of losing that prejudice against it. So yeah, now I like the experience of storytelling. So the fact that I can do it in more than one way is just I love it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm curious to see it. Well, I guess depending on when things land and where things come out, and with one eye open. When you were working on your book, I guess first off, how long did it take you to write it? Like, is this like a fairly recent thing, or is it something that you've been working on over time? And this being the Giant Gambit.
Well, Giant Gambit, I started it. I think right as the pandemic was starting in early 2020. And then that was also at the same time that I had the corporate job, the corporate marketing job. So that was, the full-time gig, and writing was the when I had time and on the weekends thing. So it took a while. It took maybe 2 years to write the whole thing, and then all the editing. I think I did like 8 passes at it after the first draft was done. And then since then, it's been querying. Lots and lots of querying, lots of waiting around, and trying to get an agent. Don't have one of those yet. Trying to get it in front of publishers, and then it's actually Alex Parker Publishing, who published my short story SSID, who's going to be publishing it in September. So yeah, the outlining and writing and editing phase probably took about 2 years. And then now it's with Alex Parker, and they're doing another developmental edit pass at it right now. So there's going to be more edits, and then after that it'll be copy edits, and then after that proofreading and proofreading and proofreading. So all in all, it's going to be a many years process to get from conception to a physical book in my hands and on the shelf.
And you mentioned around outlining. I remember this seeing a post that you made on Instagram a while ago about your outlining strategy, at least for one of your projects. I don't know if you did it with this one, but you had you wrote in like a pie or a circle format where you had like a core center, and then you had all these lines going out from it.
This thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
This
that.
is the Gas Giant Gambit outline.
Well, very cool. Very
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, like, is that something that you know, picked up from somebody else, or like, how did you? I guess how did you come about like using that strategy? What do you find the benefits are, and how does it work? Because I was looking at it and I was trying to wrap my head around. It looks super cool, but I don't fully understand it.
It is a bit of my madness bleeding through. Well, when I first got the idea to write a novel, like I have the creative side of my brain that wants to write space westerns, and then I also have a really analytical part of my brain, and I couldn't get started until I understood like the logistics of what goes into writing a novel. Like, how do I break this up? What kind of strategy do I need as far as plot points go? Like, so I did a ton of research at just figuring out the how of doing a novel, and I came across a website. No sponsorship. I love this website, and I praise it to anybody who'll listen. Helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. The woman who runs that site, her name escapes me right now. I haven't been there in a while. She has all kinds of great breakdowns. She explains everything in point format and detailed explanations. She even has examples from. She breaks down famous movies to show you how she would outline them, how she would break them down, and she uses an 8-point outline, 8-point structure. So she's got the inciting event, the first plot point, first pinch point, midpoint, second pinch point, third plot point, climax, and resolution. I guess that's 7. So I start with those. I try to have a, bird's eye view of the story. I just start with the broad strokes. And then for this one, so that would be, let's see. Inciting event is about here. First plot point is about here. So it's every 1/8 of the circle. And then I decided how many words I wanted it to be, about how long I wanted it to be. And divided that by 2,000. So every wedge on that represents about 2,000 words. And once I knew how many words I wanted the manuscript to be, divided by 2,000, that gave me how many wedges I wanted. And yeah, it's very, it's very, almost like an algorithm. And then I just kind of filled it in. There were lots of false starts. I think I've even got like this is a version of the same outline that didn't get past the first act because I didn't like what was happening, so I had to start over. So it was a process. It was an iterative process. It took a lot of time to get all of that, and then I was also concerned about how do I make sure that I'm going back and hitting all of these themes? How do I make sure that I'm not talking about a character and then dropping them and they don't show up again for another 200 pages, so that I've got all kinds of colored flags on there that, okay, this is when this character was, here he is again, there's this topic, here's this topic. So it keeps everything nice and organized, and then, at least for my brain, I'm sure it wouldn't work for everybody, but the real reason I wanted to do it this way was I really like the idea of mirror moments on either side of the midpoint. So you've got, you can they really help show the character development. If a character reacts one way in the first half and then a similar situation happens in the second half, and they react differently, we can see how they've changed. And I hated flipping pages in my notebook to try and figure out, okay, how does this match up with the moment that happened in the first half? So I'm like, well, why don't I just get a giant piece of paper and I can do it in a circle, and then I can just, here's this one, they connect, and I can see everything all at once. I don't have to be fighting my notebooks to figure out what page I wrote this thing on, because it's all on one page. But, I mean, you get a little bit of an eye strain trying to look at it all, so it's a trade-off.
That's awesome. So did you came up with this strategy?
I did. It's a combination of, like I said, what they talk about in helping writers become authors, and then there's a great book series about screenwriting called Save the Cat. So I kind of took some advice from those two sources, and then I applied it to this, I don't know, this ring cycle format, and yeah, mixed it
Yeah.
all up in a pot, and here we go. So yeah.
I mean, even just visually, it looks really neat. And I I applaud you for your thoroughness and your approach. I kind of as you're saying that, kicking myself for my own writing of like, man, I probably should have done something like that because now I'm going back and I'm like, crud, that character did this at what point and what did they say back here? So I can see how having that strategy, especially on a single page, would be like super helpful.
It helps me. I mean, it's definitely not for everybody. I mean, whenever I talk about it, people seem amazed by it, but I am equally amazed by the pantsers out there that just sit down and, through sheer force of will, put a story on the page. Like I can't do that. I try to pants my short stories and I get nowhere, and I end up just staring at the screen, going, "Duh! I have to have this system to get the creative juices flowing." So I'm equally amazed by people that can just put it out there. I have to go through all of this work before I can even start.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think I find myself somewhere in the middle, where I definitely like to prepare a little bit, where I come up with like a skeleton. But yeah, once I have my skeleton, or I use the snowflake method personally. So I start with the core concept as like a single line, and then I break that into, I think 3 or 4 parts, and then I break those parts into 3 or 4 parts. And then within each of those parts, those become my chapters eventually. And then within each chapter, I usually have like 3 or 4 main things I like to talk about within it. And then, yeah, and then I just kind of go. So it's interesting to hear, as I'm talking with more authors about how they come up with stories, that it's so diverse. But I think the important thing you mentioned is it's what works for you, and for authors who are listening, and people who are wanting to write. I think that's an important call out of like, like there's no right way, pun not intended, to write. There's the way that works for you.
Absolutely. I mean, whatever it takes to get that story out of you and into the word processors. If it works, it works. So go for it.
And you also mentioned you're working on a 7 book epic, or at least you have the at some parts of it planned. And I just wanted to quote the genre combo that you named it as. It was a 7 book epic superhero sci-fi cosmic horror dark fantasy alternate World War II history. That sounds amazing. Whereabouts is that in the whole planning of what you're working on and whatnot?
Well, that is actually the story that has been ruminating for over a decade. That my wife said, "Why don't you write it as a novel instead of a graphic novel?" That is what I hope will be my magnum opus, my Lord of the Rings, my Dark Tower series. Uh, it's it's so big, it's hard to get it all in my head. Where it is right now, I've got the first book outlined. I have the series, like the broad strokes of the series outlined. Book 2 keeps changing. I've outlined book 2 2 or 3 times, and I'm not totally happy with any of them yet. But yeah, that's the big one. I'm really hoping to get to that after the novel that I'm working on right now. And in fact, the novel I'm working on right now is sort of a prequel to it. It'll contain at least one character that's the same. He's not the same. He's not the main character of the 7-part epic one, but he's the boss of the main character from the 7-part epic one. So yeah, I'm always thinking about it. It's always in my head. The gears are always turning about it, and I really want to get to it soon. But it is so monumental that it can be daunting just to get to work on it. that's actually, I've been putting it off. Two novels, I still haven't written it yet. Two novels and God knows how many screenplays. But hopefully that'll be the next thing after what I'm working on now. But we'll see.
Fair enough. And yeah, and you, as you mentioned, you in your blog, how you've had this idea, and it's something that you obviously care a lot about. But the thing I thought was interesting is you mentioned something to the effect of you want to wait until you've had enough writing so that your writing skill can progress to a point where you feel like, all right, now's the time to apply it. The question for you is, how have you found that experience of writing? Like, if you go back to read your older writing, do you feel like you have progressed? And what are the things that you've seen, change as you continue to write more?
Yeah, no, definitely. An example of that would be the anthology that I'm appearing in later this year. The story for that was already written, and it was the first short story that I wrote since like middle school. It was too long for what they were looking for. I think it was about 12,000 words, and they needed something between 5 and 8. So I had to go back and really kind of take the axe to it a bit. But it fit their topic, which is rare and unusual secrets. So it'd been several years since I first wrote it, so I had to go back and look at it again. And it wasn't awful. I mean, obviously, I liked it enough that I wanted to spend time on it, editing it and getting it ready for the anthology. But like I said, my personal Achilles heel with writing is too flowery descriptions that take up page after page, and I'm no Tolkien, so I can't pull that off like he can. So I had to, really get that down. But now, I'm aware of it, having been through several edits of Giant Gambit, and even the screenwriting has helped with that. So that's really the thing that I had to, bring it more up to my current skill level. And I feel like I'm learning every day with this. Like, most magazines won't give you a whole lot of feedback when you send in a short story. I mean, I certainly don't have time to do that with all the short stories that I receive, and since it's just me. But on occasion, some editor will have some pity on you, or some extra time, or whatever the case may be, and they offer some feedback. And every little bit of feedback helps me, I think, become a better writer, and then I can turn around and apply that to the old stuff and to the new stuff. And that short story got accepted. It's going to be in the anthology, so it obviously worked. It had been rejected several times before, so I think that what I had learned and what I had applied in this latest round of edits really brought it up to snuff. And it's a journey. And like my marketing teachers used to say, you want to stay a student of marketing for your whole career, and I think that applies here. I want to say stay a student of writing for as long as I am writing. I think that even if I do this for 40 years, there'll still be room for improvement. So that's the goal, just to be as good a writer as I can. I don't know if I'll ever feel that I am a good enough writer to start on this epic series. I think at some point I'm just going to have to hold my nose and take the plunge. But I'm not there yet.
Yeah, the one comment I'll make, because you say that you're not Tolkien, I'll add a word to that. Not Tolkien yet. Obviously you won't ever literally be Tolkien. But from the writing that I've seen, which hasn't been much, but the writing that I have seen, you're a lot better than it sounds that you think you are.
Thank you.
So I'm really curious to see where you go. And on the other side, I just recently finished a creative writing course, and the teacher at one point called me Dickens, as in Charles Dickens, as in a person who goes at great length to describe things, to the point of when she gave me an editing pass on one of my short stories, it was half read from just cut all of that out. because yeah, I also have that unfortunate or fortunate where it's like I just really want to describe this rock. I don't know, it's a cool rock. I want people to know about the
Yeah, well, I
rock.
can see it. You should
Um,
see it too.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Continuing on the gas giant, and you mentioning about querying, how have you found the querying experience? Like that's something I personally haven't gotten to yet, but I think you have a really interesting perspective on it. I think where you're actively tracking how many rejections you have, but not even tracking. You have a goal of how many rejections you want to receive within a certain period of time. How'd you come about that? And yeah, like what's the thought process behind it? Because I thought it was pretty
Well,
interesting.
thank you. The querying it was difficult. It was frustrating. Sometimes people don't even bother emailing you back. Sometimes you wait 3 to 6 months, and then it's a no thanks. We don't even want to see the full manuscript. It can be disheartening, and I honestly don't remember what the genesis of tracking the rejections and setting a goal was. I may have seen somebody else doing it. I that's probably what happened, and I wish I remembered who it was so I could give them a shout out. But it made sense to me to kind of gamify it, and if I track all of my rejections. It's the manuscript rejections as well as short story rejections, and I aim for 100 in a year. And I started that this past year. I also kind of started it in the middle of the year, and I already had, like, even before the year started, I already had a number of rejections. So I didn't get 100 rejections in 2024. I even didn't hit 100. I think I got to 92 or 93 or something. So this is the first year that I'm actually starting in January, all the way through December. I want to get 100 rejections in the year of 2025. I'd like to hit 200 rejections total. And the thought process behind that is, no matter what, I'm going to get more rejections than I'm going to get acceptances. And it's a volume game. And there's a Ray Bradbury quote that I like to use that I am not going to remember the exact quote off the top of my head, but I'm going to paraphrase. And it's something to the effect of you can't look at a rejection as a personal failure. You have to look at it as a wrong address. And with magazines, with book agents, with publishing companies, they may be rejecting it not necessarily because they don't like it, but because it's not right for them or for their audience or what have you. In fact, I just got a rejection for a short story on Christmas Eve, where the guy was like, "I love this. I'm a huge science fiction fan. This is fantastic. It's a great story, great characters, great everything. It's not right for our audience. You need to get this in front of a hard sci-fi audience." And if I thought that we had a large percentage of our audience was hard sci-fi fans, I would totally publish it, but that's not the case. And that's frustrating. It's encouraging, but frustrating, and the fact that it's encouraging makes it even more frustrating. But I also have the unique position of being a publisher, so I get it. Like, I'm not gonna publish, I don't know, the first thing that comes to mind is erotic fiction in Perseid Prophecies. That's not what my audience is here for. So it's not always that your writing is bad. In fact, it's usually not that your writing is bad. It's just it's not the right place, or not the right time, what any number of reasons. So I figure if I can get 100 rejections in a year, at least some percentage of that is also going to be acceptances. And so it's a volume game. It's a numbers game. Get as much out there as I can, and hopefully some people will like what I have to say, and I'll get in. I'll get in somewhere.
Well, obviously people have liked what you had to say, considering you've got you know a few. Well, the one published, another one, I should say, a short published, another short on the way in the anthology, a book on the way. You've got the film in the works and the web series in the works. So it's like you just, even in that 5 seconds of you've got some stuff that people like, and I mean I definitely appreciate. I am maybe lucky, unlucky, whatever, to have not have had those rejections yet because I'm not at that stage in my writer's career. Um, but you obviously have enough quality that people, and I mean beyond the thing of saying that I enjoyed your work. Um, you have the stuff. It's just you know, finding the audience to take it, and getting through the likely sea of applications that people are making. Um, yeah, and I think you worded it really well in your blog, and I will actually direct quote you here, because I liked how you said it. You said in your blog, it's easy to look back at 100 rejections as failures, and then you continue to say, but instead I try to keep in mind that every story written is a step towards being a better writer. Um, yeah, I really like that. It's such a positive spin on failure, and I feel like yeah, there's a lot of writers who see, even if people are listening in and they hear, oh my gosh, 100 rejections, that's tough. Maybe I'm not doing good enough, or maybe I'm not a good writer. But I think the thing that you're talking about is, as you're trying to be a writer full time, it's part of that process. And I think it certainly has helped me be more realistic in terms of what to expect. So, like when people like yourself are talking about, here's how many rejections I've had. Yeah, it's helped level set, but also encourage me because you've gotten acceptances. So I appreciate that you're as as visible as you are
Oh,
about it.
glad to hear that. I will keep it up. I've got I've literally got a counter on my website that shows I update every time I get a rejection. So
Indeed,
I'm
indeed.
glad it's encouraging.
Most people I talk to on socials, they tend to call it like the query trenches, because it is difficult. I guess the question that I would have is, what would you say are some things that you've learned as you've been querying, or any, tips or tricks for people who are in the query trenches or are going into the so-called trenches?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, I would say make sure that what you're querying has had another set of eyes on it. I mean, not everybody can afford an editor. I certainly couldn't and can't. The latest edits on Giant Gambit before it was accepted were actually done by my mother-in-law. She's an avid reader and one of my biggest supporters, and she was very gracious enough to take the time to go through it. I mean, she printed it out and she had it in a binder, and she went through line by line, making notes in the margins, and it was incredibly helpful to have another set of eyes on it because I know what this character's thinking. I know what that character's motivations are, and sometimes I think it's on the page, but it may not be on the page in a way that is obvious enough. So, I mean, she writes in the margin, why are they doing this? What's going on here? I don't understand this. And then I can clarify. And so, yeah, I think first and foremost, and it was that edit that then got it accepted. Immediately after that edit, it was accepted, the next query. So first and foremost, definitely have somebody else's eyes on it, whether that be a paid editor or your mother-in-law. It's a great help. Other than that, I think it goes back to the rejections. You just have to keep your head up, and you have to keep going. You have to keep trying. It's not necessarily that you're a bad writer. It's probably not that you're a bad writer. It's probably that it's not right for that agent. It's not right for that publishing company. That maybe you're at the bottom of, maybe they got 15 emails to go through, and you're at the bottom, and they're just tired and they don't want to look at it. Like these people are human on the other end of this too. So it could be any number of reasons why you're getting rejected. You can't take it personally. You can't take it to heart. You can't take it as a failure. Because it's not a failure. It's these people that you're sending it to. They look at probably dozens of these things a day. It's a sea of people, and breaking through the noise is difficult on a good day. You're not going to do it every day with every person that you show your content to. So You just have to. I try to be realistic about it. You have to just, expect that you're going to get rejections. Keep your head up. Keep trying. It's not a commentary on your quality of work. It's the wrong, like Ray Bradbury would say, it's the wrong address.
Yeah, no, I dig that. And in a similar vein, I feel like I've had that conversation a few times with people on social media. It's a different context, but that concept of, people associating their personal worth with their ability to succeed in an area. So in my context being able to reach people or, gain followers or, what have you. Um, but there is an element of separation. I mean, yes, you do need to build quality things in order to achieve quality results. But just because you're not getting that result that you're expecting doesn't necessarily mean that what you have or what you're doing isn't quality. Yeah, it's challenging though because you know, we put in so much time and effort into the things that we love. Like these stories are things that we're passionate about. And for someone to say, no to us or no, it's not right or not even respond at all, um, yeah, that can be tough. But I like what you say is, keep working on it, keep your head up, keep trying. And you're living proof that you were able to get through.
Yep. Yep. It took a while. Longer than some, not as long as others, but yeah, you just got to keep putting yourself out there, and that by itself is tremendously difficult. Like I don't like talking about myself. I want my work to speak for me, and when people won't even look at the work, it's frustrating. But you just got to keep pushing through if you want it to happen.
Who would you say are people that you've looked up to in your writing career, um, that have inspired you, people that you resonate with? Because you've mentioned a few, like Tolkien, but who else would you say in the writer space or screenwriting space do you feel like really resonate with you personally, and have helped you on your writing career?
Well, one in particular, a woman named Becky Chambers. She's a science fiction writer. She wrote, the title is a mouthful, and I always get it wrong. The Long Way to the Small Angry Planet, I think is what it's called. It's the Wayfarer series. When I first heard about her, I was fascinated with her story. She had a full-time 40-hour job. I forget exactly what she was doing. But she wanted to write this book. And she wanted to devote all of her time to writing this book. So she set up a Kickstarter or GoFundMe and Indiegogo, something like that, crowdfunding thing. And she was able to drum up enough excitement about this concept that she got enough donations that she could quit her job and write full time. And she put all of her effort into that. She completed the book. She self-published it, and between all of her backers on the crowdsource website and the marketing that she had done after it was out, I'm not sure if she was on the bestseller list immediately or how exactly that happened, but she had enough support and enough reach about the whole thing that even after self-publishing, she was picked up by, I think, HarperCollins or something. One of the big agencies came in and snatched up the book, got her signed, and gave her a big, several book deal, and now she's doing that full time with a contract, and she made that all happen herself with her drive, and it's a great story to boot. So it's I found that incredibly inspiring. I'm not quite in the position to be able to do the exact same thing. I mean, I think few people are. That was it's an incredible plan, and it's amazing that it worked out. But yeah, I think that it's incredibly inspiring what she did, and I would love to be able to do something similar to what she's done. Other than that, as far as like actual writers go, I've been a huge fan of Stephen King since I was a little kid. I think that's where a lot of the horror comes from in my writing, and even the blending of genres. Because I mean, not so he doesn't do so much do sci-fi, but he'll do horror and fantasy and horror and drama and stuff. And then as far as screenwriters go, Dan O'Bannon, who wrote Alien, has been an inspiration to me, and then John Carpenter, like I said, The Thing has been one of my favorites. I mean, horror sci-fi, I think, is my absolute favorite genre, and I don't have anything written for that quite yet, or any ideas quite for one of those yet, but I'm gonna.
I believe it. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned around her story of how you're not sure if that kind of thing, I'm paraphrasing, but if that can happen exactly in the same way. I think that's an important thing for people in our current day and age and stage to recognize of how the industry has shifted. And even still, like the future, I'm not a fortune teller. I can't say what the future will be, but certainly I'm picking up on vibes that it's going to be different than what we've experienced in the past, which is another important thing to keep in mind. That we tend to look at some of the authors that have come in the past, like for me, it'd be like J.K. Rowling and Tolkien, and we look at how they went into writing and what their story was like. But then there's a part of it of saying, I need to recognize that that was how it worked for them, but it may not be how it works for me. And even with your own story of how, you came up with a screenplay and it just kind of happened to find its way into someone's hands. It's like, you can't really repeat that. But the encouraging side of it is, it happened and it did find its way. And maybe your story is different than hers. Maybe it's, completely different. But by continuing to push forward, you eventually did find a path through that.
Yeah, there is no one right way. It's much like how you outline or not. It's whatever works for you. And yeah, there's like, especially with things like writing, there is no. It's not like being an accountant and you get your degree and then like there's no set path. It's a tree with all of these branches and twigs, and sometimes it works, sometimes the branch breaks and you fall down, but you can just climb the tree again. It's a strange world we've chosen to work in.
Indeed. Yeah, it's definitely odd. I do appreciate the oddity, though. I feel like similar to yourself. I work in tech and in software and code and stuff. So it's nice to be able to do something that uses more of the creative side of our brains and to do something that's odd. Like for me, it's fantasy. Like I love imagining new worlds and creating things that didn't exist. So yeah, I think there is that odd side to it, but it's also appreciation of the wacky and weird and funky.
I think you got to embrace it. Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah, I just anything else that you feel like people would want to know about you? I'm thinking maybe people in the future reading the books or watching the feature films when they come out. Anything that you would like people to know?
I don't know. I mean, I've got kind of a strange background. I grew up in California. I moved to New Hampshire in the middle of high school. Was there until maybe 2 years after high school. Then I came up to Canada for university, where I discovered I had dual citizenship. I didn't know that before. And then now here I am, still in Canada. I live outside of Toronto and Oshawa. Some people might know. It's been a strange journey from where I was born in the San Francisco Bay Area to outside Toronto, and I think that helps with my writing. It's experience. Like you have to have these experiences to be able to write about people. I think. I don't know. I also have a degree in psychology. I think that helps with the writing, helps with the motivations and dialogue and stuff. But yeah, it's I also play hockey over here, and that's probably done a few things to my brain as well. So who knows?
How Canadian of you?
Yeah.
Although even though it's a recent revelation of sorts, but um, yeah, it's been fun to talk to so many people from the States, and you even mentioned that you're from California. Sean Turman, which was the last guest, also came out of Southern California, or I guess in his case, Southern California. So that's kind of cool. And I don't think that there's a pattern forming. I guess I should ask the next author where they grew up, because if they're from California, I might have to rename this the Wizard Podcast from California Origin Stories. But yeah, I saw that you were actually looking to pick up the book. And based on the bits you've been talking about, it does seem like it would be up your alley.
Yeah, no. A lot of what he had to say resonated pretty strong with me. I'm definitely looking forward to reading that one.
Nice, that's awesome. Yeah, anything else you want to say?
Okay, well, just a little bit about Giant Gambit, I guess. It is a space western, as I said. It's it's very stylized, so I want to warn people before they start reading it. I wanted to. Most space westerns, the western aspect is like on the planet. Like, I don't know if you've seen Firefly, but they go to dusty desert like planets most of the time, and that's where most of the western kind of aspect comes into it. In most science fiction, your space travel is more naval, and they call them ships, and there's a lot of seafaring kind of language and stuff. So I wanted to turn that on its head a little bit, and I was looking at the space between planets as that's the desert. And so my ships are mounts and carriages, and even the main character's ship is named Tilly for short. It kind of has it acts like a horse. It has a rudimentary personality like a horse, and it'll communicate by blowing air through the ventilation system, and so it's very highly stylized in that way. And I've also got robot farm hands and a native population that's being exploited by the greedy landowner. And what I had set out to do was take a story that would not be out of place with like a John Wayne or a Clint Eastwood, and then drop that in a science fiction setting. So it's ranchers versus miners, which is something that has been around in westerns since westerns have been around. And I've got the main character is a drifter with no name, although she does have a name for the purposes of the story. They call her Gus because there's a robot. One of the main characters is a robot named Mo, and Mo has got a problem with his wiring where he calls everybody Gus. He goes to find somebody's name in his memory banks, and Gus comes out of his mouth. So she just kind of takes on that moniker in like the second chapter for the rest of the story, and everybody calls her Gus. But it's very much like Blondie, Clint Eastwood's character in one of the, I think that's for a few dollars more. His name is Blondie. He's Joe in one of the other Man with No Name movies. So it's very very stylized. I use real Western curse words. Gus's favorite curse word is tunk, which I'd never heard it before, but it is something that cowboys said in the 1800s. I guess it means hell. Oh, man. So tunk this, tunk that. Yeah, it's fun. I had a lot of fun writing it. It's very my wife describes it as swashbuckling. Yeah, there's even like a civil war raging in the background. I like to take inspiration from old things. So this is very much inspired by the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation. The robots are my stand-in for slaves. The alien population there is my stand-in for Native Americans. And then like in the short story that's coming out later this year, that's a sci-fi noir. It's very much inspired by the Maltese Falcon movie with Humphrey Bogart. So I love looking back and pulling those themes and ideas forward and making something new with them. So I hope people enjoy it, and I hope they read it.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, for my part, you've definitely sold me on the Gas Giant Gambit. Um, yeah, it's you mentioned the stylized aspect and some of the things that you mentioned um, have piqued my curiosity to the point of like I want to know more.
Excellent. I think we'll be looking for ARC readers fairly soon. So I'm sure if you keep track of me, I'll be putting that call out in the next couple of months.
That's actually a good point. Where's your social homes? Like where can you be found on the interwebs?
I am on Threads and Blue Sky. Those are the two that I use primarily. You can also find me on Facebook, Instagram. I do have a Twitter, but I don't really use it anymore since Twitter changed their AI training policy. I've kind of shied away from Twitter, and I'm also on TikTok. But we will see how long that lasts with the pending ban in the United States. So I haven't done much with TikTok in the last couple of weeks over the holidays. Given the holidays and given what may be an impending ban, it didn't seem worth it putting the effort in. But we'll see. But yeah, Threads and Blue Sky are the main ones that I'm on, and it's just e.s.ray for both of them.
Yeah, definitely. I recommend people also checking out your blog. There's and I'll put links to all these in the description so people can find it. But yeah, you also write to a blog. You have the like I mentioned the published short story which is free. And then you've also written at least one that I know of short stories on your blog as well. So if people are on the fence, which I don't know who would be at this point, but if you're on the fence about whether or not you should check out your future works, they're great intros to your writing personality, and it shows the diverse aspect of that too. Because the two short stories I read, you can see how different you can write, but both being strong in their own merit. So yeah, I'll put links to those as well. But yeah, thanks for taking some time out of your day to talk with me about you know sci-fi and horror and books and all that fun
My
stuff.
pleasure. Thanks for having me. It's an honor being one of your first guests.
Indeed. Well, actually, I'd say the honor is mine considering where you're going. And yeah, I wish you all the best. And maybe we'll connect again after Gas Giant Gambit comes out, and maybe we can have another
It'd be
chat.
fantastic.
Cool. All right. Well, we'll sign off here. And thanks everyone for joining in. And we will catch you in the next one.